USA Today Sports, Clippers guard JJ Redick says he was exposed to Sterling's ways, as we will call him, when he was trying to do his deal. It was a 4-year, $27 million deal that nearly fell apart. Here's what Redick had to say about the reasonings behind it. I've been told both ways. One, that he didn't want me to pay me because I was white, and that he didn't want to pay me because I was a bench player. So he didn't want to pay him because he was white, Stephen A., and because he was a bench player. Your reaction?
JJ Redick's absolutely correct. He's telling the truth. It's something that's been out there for quite some time. It's something that I believe I reported months ago. After Doc Rivers took the job, if you remember, there is a window between when you can talk to the players and reach an agreement during free agency in the early part of July, and then ultimately when the signing period is allowed, you can sign. Doc Rivers had a handshake agreement with JJ Redick and his representatives. He was on board. And in the aftermath of that, Donald Sterling picked up the phone and called Doc Rivers and told Doc Rivers he didn't want JJ Redick, purportedly because his ethnicity was one part, because he looked at the league being black, athletic, et cetera, and feel like JJ Redick didn't fall under that category. And he didn't care what Doc Rivers had agreed to, even though he had just given Doc Rivers the job and gave him authority to make those kind of decisions. Doc Rivers stood firm. His belief not only was JJ Redick a quality guy, which he is, because JJ Redick is a great guy, and he's also a sharpshooter. We know what his role was coming out of Duke. This dude could really, he's a gunner. He can put it up.
And can I say real quick, yes, he made a big jump shot and 2 big free throws down the stretch.
That's right.
Yeah.
He's a guy. JJ Redick, I've always said this from the time he came into the league. You want him on your team.
Right.
You just do. He's just that. He's a talented shooter. He knows his role, and he plays it. And, so Doc Rivers, the reason why Donald Sterling backed off, according to my sources, Doc Rivers threatened to quit. He was going to leave.
Over JJ Redick.
Well, he was going to quit. It wasn't just over JJ Redick. It's over the principle of giving your word and keeping it. And also making sure that Donald Sterling honored his word and the authority he gave Doc. So Doc was going to walk away and was going to quit unless JJ Redick, unless his deal with JJ Redick was honored.
It's powerful.
And that is what happened. But I say all of that to say, without naming any names, there are a plethora of coaches that are a bit reticent about bringing on white players. Not because when you look at how athletic the league is, they look at these guys and they say, what role can they play? But JJ Redick can shoot. So when you can shoot and you have a high basketball IQ, those things play well. But then the Dirk Nowitzkis of the world come along and they debunk that, and a plethora of other guys, and even when Larry Bird came into the league and all of that. So remember the whole Rodman, Isaiah Thomas controversy, whatever, because you had certain players that had those questions because of how guys were ballyhooed. But today's coaches are far more sophisticated than that. Here's the thing. It's not about your ability to run and jump or whatever the case may be. The reason why they tend, and they're never going to acknowledge this, but the reason why they tend to lean towards a lot of African-American players is not just because of their ability, but because of their hunger.
Sure.
When you come from different segments of our society and you're relatively well off, it's one thing. Nobody's going to everybody that goes into the league for the most part works hard, and they put forth a valiant effort. But it's just like a boxer getting into the ring. It's one thing when you're reliant strictly upon your skill. It's another thing entirely when your family and your well-being and your quality of life is at stake.
Yeah.
When you don't have that concern, the level of fire inside of your belly to succeed is deemed as being somewhat short compared to those who are starving for the success. So it's not just simply about ethnicity. We point to that because from a socioeconomic perspective, obviously you have a lot of black folks in America that struggle considerably more than most white folks in America. But at the same time, it's not that they're choosing black over white or anything like that. They're looking at a guy that isn't necessarily starving like that compared to somebody who is. And that's usually the kind of player they want on their roster. And that's where it comes from, more so than ethnicity. But there have been some coaches that look at it and they say, that's why I would prefer the black player.
To your point, and in fairness to Donald Sterling, let's remember, he had just sunk 5 years and $52 million into a Chris Kaman who had not come close to living up to said contract. So he had been scorched by that one, and he's saying, wait a second, and JJ was quoted in USA Today as saying, it may have been because I'm white, or it may have been because I was a bench player. Remember, he was not a starter in his, 7 years in Orlando? Not a starter. So Doc is saying, yes, let's give, 27 million for 4 years to a JJ Redick who's not been a starter in the league because, by golly, I'm going to start him because we need that. We need that offside shooter. That sort of Steve Kerr kind of, not that Steve Kerr was a starter for the Bulls, but that's what Doc knew that team needed, was some sharpshooter to take a little pressure off Blake and DeAndre inside. Right. Okay, so Doc knew what he was doing, and Doc was dead on right because, hey, JJ's been really good. He had his back issue for a while.
I don't believe you win this series against the Warriors without JJ Redick.
Okay, now, just so I don't come across as a hypocrite, you know I've taken the position several times in the past on this show before NBA drafts saying, gee, I'm just being honest about it. I look back at the long history of overdrafted American players in this league. Mostly I'm talking about 7-foot-plus players, that they've been drafted too high and rarely, if ever, have lived up to their draft spot. And remember, a couple of years back, we were stuck on Myers Leonard before he went in his draft. And he was projected in the top 10. And I said, no, you can't. And Portland took him 11th. And where is he now?
Right.
He's on Portland's bench. He averaged 8.9 minutes a game this year. And in the first round series against the Rockets, he played 0 minutes. So let's just put that in perspective. And before the Adam Morrison draft, I said, no, wrong. And Michael Jordan was really wrong about that. Before Jimmer Fredette's, face of college basketball draft, I said, no. He can't play. Not at that. He can't be a starter or a star in this league. And now he's wound up from Sacramento to the Bulls bench. Okay, fine. So Donald Sterling may have different motivations. I'm just trying to be objective about it. Now, the European-born or the South American-born, what would you call them, Caucasian players? That's a whole other story because they might come with a different mentality and a different skill level than some of the American kids.
It's more so the mentality than anything else, and I stand by my previous explanation.
Yeah.
But I do think, to piggyback off of what you said and to support what you said to some degree, the fact of the matter is when you look at some of the rule changes that have taken place in recent memory and some of the things that have been stipulated to soften up the game, to lead more, to assist more in the fluidity of an offensive mindset and what have you. You've had a lot of people in the black community complaining that the objective was to lighten the hue of the NBA.
Maybe.
Whether it be using the European players to come on board or whatever the case may be, because you didn't want just a league full of black players. But at the same time, it's pretty hard to make that case. I'm just acknowledging that it's a suspicion that emanates from the community, but at the same time, it's pretty hard to sit there and look at the NBA and say emphatically that that is the case, because the NBA, led by Commissioner Stern, has done a phenomenal job of promoting a league that's about 80% black. They don't shy away from it. They embrace it. And, you look at the LeBrons and the Kevin Durants and others, and they're like, please, we don't care about this. Look at these guys. They're fantastic individuals that represent our sport well. So we can't accuse that of having veracity to it, but it has to be acknowledged that there are people who have felt.
Okay, bottom line, given Donald Sterling's recent racist comments, put into perspective what you believe his motivation would be to say, I don't want white players.
Well, I think that, he may fall along the lines of when you're bringing women into the locker room and you're encouraging, according to the allegations that have been levied against him, and when you're encouraging black players in the locker room not to get dressed, and you're telling women, look at these beautiful black Adonises and stuff like that, and you listen to Baron Davis and other people allude to him having the slave plantation mentality, whether that be a Baron Davis or whether that be an Elgin Baylor, what it lends itself in terms of thinking towards is, obviously he feels about black folks that, that they're laborers, and he ain't necessarily comfortable with somebody who's not black coming across as a laborer. That's the mentality that he gives off.
After the break, it's our final take, NBA edition.